Hello, today is April 17th. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. If any folks have anything they want to add to the agenda, please do it now. Otherwise, we'll kind of start to burn through the agenda items, at least in order for right now. I had talked with Andrew Sky Kim on an issue in the backlog with regards to self-hosted control plane and dealing with the external cloud provider, and there's an issue there. And he was going to kind of give a TLDR summary on some of the issues that they're running into.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Andrew. I work at DigitalOcean, but on the side, I work on Kubernetes, and I'm part of the cloud provider working group. So pretty much the problem is that with self-hosted Kubernetes, we rely on some of the fields that the kubelet sets on the node to kind of figure out, what the daemon set's IP and whatever should be. And that's not a problem for in-tree cloud providers because we kind of build the kubelet binary with all that information, so we can actually fetch that information using the metadata. So for external cloud providers, the problem is that when the node registers, it gives itself a taint, and then it waits for some external controller to remove the taint and then fill in all the necessary fields that are specific to cloud. So the problem there is that you need the API server running to set those fields, but then we rely on the kind of self-hosting mechanism to run the API server. So there's that chicken and egg problem that the cloud provider working group, has not really solved yet. So pretty much it seems like there's two options. One is don't use self-hosted for external clouds, which seems like we want self-hosting option to be for everyone. So maybe not a good option. But if we do use self-hosting, maybe like force users to explicitly set the advertised address flag.
Yes, that's always been the case. I think working externally from the outside in, there's a lot of context that's lost. And I don't think I think from a documentation perspective, we haven't necessarily done the best of job with regards to articulating the constraints of self-hosting. It's still alpha, right? It's never been graduated because there's a bunch of issues associated with it. And I'm on the hook to write a proposal with how to fix some of those issues in the long haul, at least within this cycle. So I think in the no-win scenario for this one, for the time being, is that you shouldn't an external cloud provider should not be relying on self-hosting, at least for any period of time, for a couple of releases until we get this thing into a beta state that people can rely on.
Yeah, sounds good. And yeah, the second option I was going to kind of say, and it seems kind of hacky, is that we can run the API server with the static pod and then wait for the external controller to do whatever it needs to do, and then we can shift to a self-hosted version. But again, it sounds like it's operationally complex and code might get a little messy trying to fit that logic in.
So to give you a TLDR of kind of the idea behind the change that I want to make, or the proposal, is to basically have a Sentinel pod which does exactly what you mentioned. The Sentinel pod, which would basically be a single static manifest that gets started up, whose sole goal in life is to detect whether or not the self-hosted control plane is up, and if it's not up, bring up a static pod and then pivot and then shut itself down. So its only purpose in life is to do that machination. This gets us out of the bad scenario of having to do checkpointing. And it also just simplifies the problem on restart conditions.
Okay.
But that's all vaporware at this point.
Noted.
Right.
Okay, so for next steps, I will kind of emphasize this problem in the working group too, to kind of, maybe there is something we can do on the kubelet side to kind of simplify this also. But yeah, I'll definitely keep that in mind, and I'll bring it up in the meeting.
With regards to that other PR where I kind of stopped it, using the pod IP for something that is self-hosted where you have a load balancer in front of it, that I don't even know how that could even work. So with the PR that was proposed, because there was an issue there, you need the host IPs because the load balancer will be pointing to the multiple master situation without having that host IP value percolated throughout your system. I don't see how you're could even run that way.
Yeah, so that was also whoever wrote the PR. I think the intention was that if you run a pod in host network and then you try to get its pod IP, you would essentially get the host IP. And we thought that we go through a different code path if we try to use pod IP instead of using the host IP. But it turns out if you try to get the pod IP with the download API on host network, it's the exact same code path. So the problem was still there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for the summary. And well, I'll try to take it on within this cycle to update documentation on the state of self-hosting, as well as the proposals that we're going to try to write up this cycle.
Okay, sounds good. And if the working group figures out something that might be helpful on the kube admin side, we'll bring it up.
Okay. All right. Next up, the back patch for TLS support for 1.9 to 1.10. Jason, and is Leon too? I saw Lee there too. Yeah. So if you two want to give us an update.
I can start if you want, Lee. So we're still plugging away trying to find a reasonable Band-Aid fix for 1.10 for fixing the upgrades. I have a PR out there already to fix the race condition that we have around checking the pod status. But as we've kind of iterated on different fixes for that, at least fixes that we can backport to 1.10, we can do much better for 1.11. We keep running into issues with the way that we're generating the manifest right now and some of the plumbing needed to kind of rectify the situation and be able to handle the non-TLS to TLS etcd upgrade. Last night I kind of had a little bit of a revelation that we could just use the etcd status to verify the etcd static pod is redeployed rather than worrying about checking that the static pod has been redeployed. So I have a PR out there. I'll get the link in the meeting notes that basically just disables the static pod hash check for the etcd static pod and then just pulls it has a pause for 30 seconds to wait for the API server or the kubelet to delete the old static pod, and then it just pulls the etcd URL to verify that etcd comes back up. And if it doesn't come back up in a reasonable amount of time, then it initiates a rollback like we have today. It seems to be a reasonable workaround for the solution right now. The PR is still kind of unpolished and still needs to be fixed up, but I think it proves kind of the POC that we can kind of have at least a somewhat simpler fix. It's still bigger than I'd prefer for a backport fix, but
yeah, my personal opinion on this is like, what level of functionality do you expect to be able to achieve out of kubeadm for a resulting backport? So the interesting case that I ran into and ended up putting together a solution for in the very large PR that I put up yesterday morning is that so in the current upgrade DAG, if you successfully upgrade etcd and then the API server fails to upgrade, kubeadm thinks, hey, that's pretty okay. The data store is fine. But it doesn't take into consideration that the API server manifest may not be configured with a compatible protocol set up for talking to etcd. And so you need to handle the case for when the API server is not going to come up when you roll it back if you have a successful etcd TLS upgrade. And so that is one of the cases that is handled in the PR that I put up yesterday, because I noticed that there were 2 reports on the issue. about how after getting past the etcd upgrade, etcd is not rolled back when the API server potentially fails. So that's something that my PR handles. I don't think that if we are going to if the goal is to make 110 actually function properly, the patch will not be simple, is what I've concluded. After several goes at this, with Jason's 2 PRs on the kubelet API patch, and then also the untls patch, and then my patch that adds support for querying etcd for both TLS and non-TLS and introspecting the pod manifests. Basically, there are no structures in the code right now that allow the functionality to allow the business logic that we actually need. And so we have to kind of create the tools and put them in. One thing that's encouraging about the patch that I put up yesterday is that it's a lot of util. So the actual code that's getting hit in the execution path, the logic changes are relatively simple. It's just that final commit. So I think that's the solution in itself is pretty simple. It just needs help, helper functions.
So why don't, that is an edge case. Do we have, I haven't looked through the details of the original issue filed. Is upgrading the API server and then rolling back the API server a common condition that people are running into? Because that seems more of an edge to me, but I don't have data, right? For me, it just works most of the time, but I could also MacGyver my way out, right?
So the one edge case that I'm aware of right now is depending on how they hit the race conditions around the pod status checks right now with the broken upgrade.
Well, so we're going to be running 110 code, as people continually adopt Kubernetes 110. We've got a long runway till 111. So I really do think that we should backport the pod hash check.
Okay. So if we're going to do this, we need to go all in and combine and reduce the patches onto a single patch change set and make sure we test the hell out of it. And so we're going to need folks who have time for testing to verify this patch set. So I know I've gotten a couple of emails recently from folks who want to contribute or don't know where to contribute or how to help and get engaged. This is a concrete way for them to, the testing scenario is really simple. You install 1.9 and then you upgrade to 110. And just in that scenario, everything should work properly and there should be no issues. And we might even come up with a couple of failure conditions for testing, but we need to test the heck out of it. And that's a very simple way for folks to contribute who want to. In the meantime, Jason and Lee, what do you guys want to do? You have so many patches now that I've lost track. We need to rally to one and try to make that one include all of the machinations that we've determined are the cleanest and simplest ways for dealing with it. Like using the kubelet manifest versus actually, I like the querying etcd status portion for the etcd upgrade. I think that's far simpler. So if we can crib that piece out, that would be clean. I'm not sold on the kubelet API for the API server, because if an API server fails, it will either query it or not, right? After a timeout interval. So I think that I don't think we need the kubelet interface if we have the etcd check in place. Is that fair?
So
I do think it's fair.
Yeah, and there is one catch with that too. Is I did have to reorder where we're getting the static pod hashes to begin with for the control plane upgrade. We were
I did that as well.
The upgrade before, as long as we do that before the etcd upgrade, then there's no issue with it.
Okay. I was kind of shaky about that because I ended up having to do that in my patch as well, and it doesn't seem to negatively affect the upgrade.
As long as we fix the race condition around the pod hashes.
Yeah, which my code is based off of yours for that. That was my only real caveat. So it's like, I think my patch is a pretty complete solution.
Mhm.
The only bit that I don't really like is that I have to skip the layer 7 checks for etcd, because I didn't have a waiter, an HTTP waiter for the etcd status check. So if we would take your code from your new patch, which does the etcd status check in a waiter, then we can put that back in on top of my patch. And then that should be pretty ready to go.
Okay.
Thanks.
I think let's rally on that single PR then that you have, and let's combine and distill those bits, and I'll let you two work out the details and try to close down the other PRs, because we have got, I think there's 4 or 5 separate PRs that are working on pieces of this. Close down the other ones and just point them all to rally on the single PR, and then we'll try to hash out the details on that one and try to get that merged. I don't know, by the end of this week. Does that seem reasonable? I want to get enough bake time on this thing for us to validate, at least by hand for the time being. So we're going to have to custom validate the process.
Yeah, I have a shell script already that goes through all of the upgrade cases for different Kubedian versions.
Okay.
Jason, do you want to open up a PR to my branch, or do you want? I can just give you commit access to my repo.
Yeah, I can just open up a PR to it. That'll work.
Cool. Yeah. Because I'm gonna be at DevOps days in like the next 30 minutes. But I will be able to review that later, probably.
Okay.
I haven't looked at your etcd waiter PR, but I assume that it'll splice right in.
With a little bit of polish, it'd be fine.
Do you know what I'm talking about with the how I skipped the layer 7 check on is TLS upgrade?
Yep.
Yeah, so if we just pull out that if and then put it in a waiter or some kind of sleep, then I think it'll be pretty solid.
Okay. So I'll let you guys work out the logistics, and we'll close down the other issues, and ping me when it's ready for review again. And I think I want to probably loop in other folks too, especially the folks in China who are very prolific on the reviews. Then we can try to get that in hopefully before the end of the week, and I'll talk with the release team too as well. That kind of lends into the next conversation piece. Is there anything else there?
Yeah, I kind of want to ask a question before we move on.
Sure.
So what kind of API server failures you guys are seeing then when upgrading?
Personally, I have not seen any. These are reports that are also mixed in with the fact that people are running racy code.
Yeah,
so, we have a patch that fixes the race.
So I've hit the race condition the right way a couple of times where the etcd upgrade completes, but the API server fails to upgrade, basically because of the way it's checking the pod hashes. It was checking it at one point when the API server was down, and then the way it was checking those hashes later on caused the API server deployment to fail and roll back just the API server and have a broken deployment because etcd is TLS enabled. The API server was rolled back to non-TLS for etcd.
Another one that I've seen is improper TLS serialization. So if some user config has created improper certs and the TLS configuration is no longer valid, then the API server will fail to come up. It's not its fault, but
Are there any other questions, comments, concerns about this current topic, or should we move on to the next one?
Thanks for reviewing all of the time that it's taken for the stickiness of this patch.
Thanks for putting patches together. I think it's much appreciated. I think going forwards, as I mentioned in the last call, I need to work with Ben the Elder. I was going to do that later on today to fix the upgrade testing because it was broken in the 110 cycle. And it was broken because of the machinations and the apparatus that were legacy that no one wants to maintain. So I'm going to fall on the sword there and try to get those back in place.
I would like to see a little bit of contributor documentation. So like even if the automated tests are broken, like we should be able to validate builds locally and like proceed with more confidence than like we were very ignorant about this on the release.
Well, this kind of lends itself into some of the work that Liz is doing too with regards to end-to-end tests, but our end-to-end tests for kubeadm proper are not very complete. And having a simple set of the broader scope testing infrastructure of end-to-end tests, which stand up whole clusters and do everything else, are one piece of the puzzle, but having a localized set of end-to-end tests that allow us to do very focused failure-driven scenarios, that has always been a thorn in our side. And again, if folks are interested in contributing, that is an area for them to contribute in that would be highly beneficial. But I think maybe we'll talk about that after the next topic, but that kind of, they play on each other pretty well, right? The next topic is the question, it also relates to upgrades, but with Liz, did you want to talk about the notion of ending the weird support model we have?
Sure. So at the moment, you can use kubeadm 1.10 point something to upgrade Kubernetes 1.9.x to 1.9.y. And because all of the configuration files and stuff have been pretty much the same version to version, that hasn't yet been a problem. Unfortunately, there was a breaking change to the Sonobuoy configuration format inadvertently introduced elsewhere in the project.
kubeadm configuration format.
Yeah, exactly. The kubeadm master configuration format, to be specific. So now things that are serialized out from kubeadm 1.9 cannot be serialized into kubeadm 1.10 without causing a bunch of errors. Our solution was to read these in as unstructured, manipulate them into the new format that 1.10 expects, and then serialize them into the Kubernetes objects that we expect. Unfortunately, it was not quite so straightforward. For example, our initial thought was to gate doing this on the previous version and the current version, so only run the migrations if kubeadm is 1.10 and the past version is 1.9. But if you're doing that, you can't serialize. You'd be running the migrations to serialize into kubeadm. kubeadm would then serialize out that 1.10 compatible format. And if you're then trying to upgrade 1.9, it's going to fail because the changes are incompatible. So Fabrizio and I talked a bunch about the proper ways to solve this. And by far the least worst option, I'm not going to say good, but least worst, is to end our support for upgrading older minor and major versions of Kubernetes using a newer kubeadm binary, because these issues with configuration file formats and other, I suspect that we could easily introduce errors like this in the future in other ways. We need to have much better testing apparatus before we're going to say, yes, we're going to guarantee that you can do this. The way that I have been testing this is simply by building the 110 binaries myself and just SCPing it to the servers that I'm upgrading. Obviously, that's not a solution for like bulk fleet deployments. But if you're doing a strict upgrade, all you have to do is the plan step, then upgrade in whatever what you have allocated to do that, and then the 1.10 upgrade step. The plan is to not backport the changes that we've made to 110 to 1.9, so those will continue to function as normal. And then once people decide to use kubeadm to upgrade to 110, our changes will be backported to the 110 branches, so those upgrades will work from 10.2 onward as we expect. That was a lot of words that I just said. Does that make any amount of sense to anybody?
I think what you're proposing is sensible. You know, there's probably some more involved solutions, like if we really did want to continue the support model. But yeah, this is not something I'm uncomfortable with. I think this makes sense. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that's going to make this sort of thing much easier to support is eventually we would like to get our configuration structs into beta, which means they are much less likely to change in backwards incompatible ways. And I'm working on E2E tests right now. Jason is working on getting the upgrade tests working again. And I think once we have that infrastructure in place, we'll be in a much better position to consider supporting this again. But given that the upgrades are broken right now, I think this is the most expeditious solution.
In general, I've always felt slightly uncomfortable with having a upgrade pattern for a newer version of software for a new installer version on an older version. That just generally is an uncomfortable scenario that I've never supported in the past. I don't know if other people are using it or if other people have thoughts there. So I'm going to open it up for comment.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm interested in this topic because I actually ran into I can foresee a bug with the etcd TLS upgrade that actually is also everywhere else. That has to do with the fact that during the upgrade, we never have a version of the old configuration and a new configuration. And it would be very beneficial to kind of before that API goes into beta, so for our actual master configuration object, that we would have important versioning aspects placed into the struct, like when the current cluster was deployed, what version of kubeadm it was deployed with, and what version of the configuration map is it? When was the configuration map serialized? Some of these things we already have in the Kubernetes API. Others are just not there.
The existing.
I don't know if this is something that's appropriate in a config map or as a separate data object, but it's really more of the state store about cluster states.
So the existing master configuration objects do import type meta, which means they could have fields like kind and version info. They don't right now. Those fields are just unset. I don't know why. It's probably just nobody ever got around to doing it. What they do have is the version of Kubernetes that I don't know exactly how this is set. I think it's the version of Kubernetes that was running when the map was serialized. It's in that struct as it's called current Kate's or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. So some of that version information is available, but I think having the kind and version actually be filled out is the sort of Kubernetes way to do this sort of thing. And then we can have converters using the API machinery jiggery.
I had a question about the struct that changed from like a string to a map string bool. Is that right?
Yep.
Would that have been a case where the API version should have changed for that struct?
If the underlying thing was in beta, yes.
But it doesn't change if it's alpha.
Yeah,
So,
alphas, yeah.
Okay.
So what I read up on the API machinery, and technically I think it should have changed. It should have revved for alpha as well. They just don't necessarily have to guarantee migrations for alpha revs.
Yeah, so maybe we should release V1 Alpha 2, but I don't think we're going to at this point, because I think the primary concern is getting this fix out the door so that we can, have people actually do this upgrade and get their kubeadm infrastructure on 1.10, and long-term concerns are, not irrelevant, but secondary to that right now.
I can tell you what we do in COPS for our version skew strategy, which is COPS 1.9, for example, supports installation of Kubernetes 1.9, 1.8, 1.7, 1.6, I think still 1.5 technically. In other words, we go all the way back. And the reason we do that is simply pragmatic, that we don't want to have to backport a fix into COPS 1.8 and COPS 1.7. So we instead say always use the latest version, because otherwise we'd have to backport. That was the trade-off we made.
I think COPS has a lot more testing infrastructure available and in core and stuff. I see COPS tests running on my PRs and stuff all the time, and I've certainly never seen a kubeadm one.
I mean, yeah, if you put up a test at all, I mean, you can put them into test infra and it will run, and then getting on the, you may not want to be on the on each PR, but yes, it is certainly, it's very open to be on the dashboard to run against master. And I think you can even get a PR builder that doesn't actually appear, a sort of stealth PR builder, which is probably the optimum scenario.
There are builders for all of this stuff. The question is, they're not blocking for on a per PR basis, but there's also the upgrade. The upgrade job is totally busted, and that was the problem. And it was busted for all of 1.10 cycle. And we knew it was busted. We knew how it was busted. And it was all a matter of like everyone looking in a circle saying, we see this issue, we know what it is, we know why it's there, but like who owns this piece? And the answer was nobody. And so now I think I'm going to take it on, whether I like it or not, to try and fix the issue. So I'm going to talk with the test infra folks to try and address this post haste. So it might be worthwhile to maybe have a conversation as part of the kubeadm office hours tomorrow to talk about the infrastructure that's there and how we want to kind of modify it, because it is a thorny problem. No one wants to own this piece of the puzzle, but everyone wants the signal, right? So it's kind of like we need to get there so we can actually get signal locally, as well as having the global picture for other folks who are involved. It doesn't seem like anyone's like hating the idea, Liz. I think we can probably, Fabrizio, did you have comments there? I know you've been the most intimately involved.
I think that this is the only viable way to fix the problem in the short term. And I personally think that for this release we should remove this kind of support and then think for the long term if to support or not. And this is for the first point. And please go on.
I totally agree. I think there needs to be a cap that we put up for two things, for the configuration file as well as the upgrade semantics and support structure that we wish to have going forwards. I think that would give a contract to folks so that they can rely on it and make sure that we keep ourselves honest.
Yes, I agree. Second is just a small comment, is that the PR now fixes the problem. And but if we want to address these definitely, we have to polish the user experience a little bit. For instance, the upgrade plan should stop to suggest to user this kind of the upgrade path that is not supported. So for the time being, we are fixing a problem. I'm fine with UX that is not optimal. But if we stay on this line, we have to polish all the UX accordingly.
Totally agree.
Just on this topic, the bug that I'm talking about with the configuration files is that etcd data path, data dir and certificates dir are user configurable. And if you change them between an upgrade, it will break the upgrade because A, we have no code to handle the directories changing, and B, we don't even have access to the previous configuration.
So that I would consider to be separate concerns, but I do believe there needs to be a reconfig option. We have upgrade, but we don't have like a reconfig. It's basically you change the config, now reset all the parameters. It's almost like a init v2. But I'm not as concerned about that so long as we spell out the contract. If somebody changes it in the middle and we have a reconfig option, I'm totally okay with that. But if they change the config and they do an upgrade, that's kind of in their own, they're in their own space now, right?
Yeah, what I'm really getting at is that kind of ability to compare structures could have been a good escape hatch for us for this particular fix. And so that's just another code smell where I'm like, oh, look, we have no ability to compare the previous configuration structure with the requested one. And looking at the code there, it's very single purpose. So
yeah,
that's
I
something
think
to keep in mind.
I think the lesson from the 110 release into 111, or the series of lessons, is we need to have well thought out designs that we agree upon and make sure we document the hell out of them. So that way, as new people come on board and come in line into the SIG, we can hand off and the contracts are clean and well defined. Right.
Well, and try not to rely on other internal API objects that are alpha and changing underneath us.
That's super hard. But yes, we shouldn't be promoting things that are alpha grade into kubeADM in general. If there are alpha API objects, we should try to avoid them. I think the only reason why some of those things were done was to allow for easier deployments at that time. But again, I think going forwards, even like the dynamic kubelet configuration, we had like a number of PRs to enable that feature, but we're avoiding that until it reaches beta. Is the horse sufficiently beaten to death on upgrades? Can we move on to the next topic? I already talked about update tests. I wanted to make a PSA, and I sent an email to SIG Cluster Lifecycle with regards to how we're kind of like approaching triage, backlog, execution ordering, yada, 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 because not everybody can attend this meeting. So I know that there are folks in China who are actively contribute to the SIG. And I want to make sure that the process that I talked about last time is pretty clean and simple. We have a 111 backlog and I basically assign people who I know are going to be like active with a certain percentage of their time on the SIG. But that does not mean that they are the sole person that can execute on these things. So if the person who's been the default assignee, marks it as active, that means that they're about to make a patch, right? So let's let them finish their patch, and then we can contribute that way. But if they're not marked as active, or if they're not working on it, feel free to take the issue on and talk with the assignee, and also communicate on the SIG cluster lifecycle Slack channel. I do know that it can be kind of intimidating trying to vector into a tornado, but there's a lot of folks here in the SIG who can help you and on-ramp you into that, right? So if you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, feel free to take a look at the email or to hit us up on the Slack channel, on the SIG cluster lifecycle Slack channel, and we'd be happy to try and unblock you where you want to contribute. Does that seem reasonable to folks? Any questions, comments, complaints, concerns? I'll pause for a second here to see if anybody has any comments. Yes, no. All right. Last topic, Chuck, you want to talk about augmenting etcd phases?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about HA clusters for a second. We have that one cap out for kubeadm join master, and that cap intentionally punts on etcd. It says use an external etcd, essentially. And I think it would be great to have a phase in the etcd, or a command in etcd phase to help us spin up an etcd, an HA etcd cluster. Not something totally automated, but something to help at least with the manual process of adding members to clusters. I was thinking. Yep.
Hey Chuck, I've proposed this before, and I think that we can use a lot of what we already have with the kubeadm config, etcd extra args, and then etcd local. The task is that I was going to take on, and I would totally welcome pair programming, or if you want to own this totally, then be my guest, please. When talking with Lucas about it, he said that he sees that it would be possible to put together a POC of documentation about how to spin up a multi-node etcd cluster with the current kubeadm machinery. So just using kubeadm alpha phase etcd local with the configuration object to spin up a multi-node cluster. We believe that it is already possible. So
cool.
Yeah, that relates to what you're talking about.
Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of the phase I'm at right now, is looking at what exists and how to get from etcd local to a multi-node cluster. So
yeah, I think what we also want to do too is trim down some of the GUI that we've added over time that was originally intended to be part of the operator, but given that CoreOS, or now Red Hat, has no intent on supporting that, we should probably deprecate any of that stuff, because it was never fully enabled. It was always the plan to get that online, but it was never all there. And with the central storage of much of the information in the config, I think it's totally possible today to do a lot of that configuration apparatus. I think the one challenge will be the cert copying across the members, but that is totally accomplishable through temporary secrets or through CRDs, which is already part of the operator stuff. So you could trim out a piece of it, right? Which is also stuff we've commented on.
And a reminder, I also have the etcd manager project, which I am continuing with. So, I think not necessarily that particular project, but just the idea that we probably want external tools that we interface with, rather than, building it into kubeadm. And I also would welcome anyone that wants to work on etcd manager, but there are lots of other tools out there that do similar sort of things, that bootstrap HA etcd clusters, typically on AWS or a particular cloud. And integration with those tools could be a good way to to do that. And I don't think necessarily has to be built into kubeadm, but could be a shell out or a command that is printed or something.
The long term, what I'd like to see kubeadm do, and I'm going to talk about this with tomorrow too, is in many respects it's nearing the edges of bubbling up into the spaces where we didn't want to go into, right? And ideally, we'd sort of punt out or rip out the code into factored tools, and I think that's a totally reasonable approach in the long haul, right? So that way, it's kubeadm then sort of says this is its scope, and then we use this other tool and it's composable for this feature set. I do think that making it tightly bound and dependent and clean and simple will be required, but I don't think we're there yet. I think right now having the story for the person who wants to come to this with a simple environment and have a very clean, simple user experience is what we want to optimize for. And then factoring those pieces out is definitely something I would like to do. Like, for example, the self-hosting feature itself, I would like to completely factor that out of kubeadm and put that into what I've been calling the Sentinel, right? That pivoting apparatus doesn't need to belong in kubeadm proper and could belong as part of the Sentinel, right? Same with etcd management, right? We can completely punt to a separate tool, right? But I think for the time being, talking about the UX workflow in the ideal scenario is a beneficial thing, right? Like anybody who wants to spin up an etcd cluster, we want to be able to make it as simple and as clean as humanly possible.
Cool. Sounds good.
Are there any more group topics? We've got 12 minutes left, or we can give it back.
Something that I can, just bring back from the dead is if we've heard anything or if anybody's taken action items on the SIG face-to-face that we started talking about putting together for KubeCon EU.
There is a bunch of separate meetings, but I have not. We don't have a separate venue or location for a face-to-face, but I don't think that would be a bad idea. I know there's the contributor summit, which is on Tuesday. Justin, did you set up some separate time? I know you were going to set up a separate location, or you're thinking about it at least.
Sorry, I was looking nice. For the KubeCon EU, you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
There is. I have to catch up on that. There is a AWS thing and there is a COPS thing. So I don't know whether that's at least what it is right now. I don't know whether there's a separate kubeadm track, but
there is a deep dive, but there is no separate like face-to-face thing.
Oh, right.
But I wouldn't mind doing something informal if folks want to, and we can use like the Slack channel to coordinate during the contributor summit, because sometimes I find contributor summits to be, I don't know. If you've been around this game for a while, you know most of what's the TLDR, what's going to happen during contributor summit. So setting aside, finding a corner to chat about long-term plans is kind of helpful.
Yeah, I just remember that there was agreement that we would, that it would be good to put together like a contributors session specifically for the SIG, where we could help people like onboard onto an issue or that kind of thing and get together to talk about roadmap. So I remember Lucas and Chris Nova being kind of the main like people behind this. I am going to see Chris in about 30 minutes. So I can sync up with her on it and see if she was going to continue doing something in that manner.
I do believe that we found time, but the time was really late at night, and it would be very difficult to incentivize people to want to come to a late night venue when there's all these other things going on. So if Chris can find something else or some other time, I think that would work well.
Cool. yeah, I think that closes that out. I just wanted to check in and see if anybody had updates. So.
Okay. Any last comments? T-minus 9 minutes. Going once, twice, 3 times. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.